Hello out there in Twitchland. How are we doing today? My name is James Spencer. I am a partner solutions architect here at AWS, and welcome to Howdy Partner. If this is your first time joining us, what is Howdy Partner? Howdy Partner is one of our weekly shows that we do where we bring on AWS vetted partners, show off what they're great at, show their great solutions. I'm excited for today. I'm kind of a developer at heart underneath it all. And today we're going to be talking specifically about API development, amongst other things. Hopefully some jokes. Hopefully, I'm going to tell them, you can laugh. I appreciate it. But anyway, uh, I'm going to bring on my co-host. My co-host is Prachi. Prachi, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, James?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to the weekend. It's holiday. If you're in America, at least it's going to be a holiday tomorrow. Day off. That's always great.
Where are you
So,
joining from today?
uh, so for the, I'm actually going to Victoria in Canada for the weekend. So that's going to be
Oh,
kind of cool.
nice.
Yeah. So I'm talking too much. Prachi, tell us a little about yourself real quick.
So for people who are new here, I am Prachi Doshi. I'm a partner solutions architect at AWS. I usually work with different partner accounts on the North America region and help them with providing technical guidance for their new solution builds and capabilities, as well as like through technical reviews, architecture reviews, different partner programs. So yeah, happy to be here today with you, James, and talk to one of our partners today.
Yeah, that's great. And if anyone watching is from any of our other partners, uh, we'd love to have you on. We'd love to also get in contact with you if there's anything you're.
James, you're on mute.
Are we back?
Yep, I can hear.
Lovely. Oh, love it. Yeah, anyway, we'd love to be in contact with you. Let your Alliance lead know you'd love to be a part of what we're doing, and we'll get in touch with you that way. Anyway, I'm babbling. I don't know what I'm doing. So when it comes to development, APIs are a huge part of web applications. Speak louder. I hopefully you can hear me. Um, I don't know. I'll try and adjust it, but in a little bit. But while someone else is rambling, but yeah, we're going to be talking about API development. That's one of the key things in applications, helping communicate requests and producers, getting data, being able to facilitate different things that might not normally be intertwined. Well, I'll come up with an example later. But anyway, I'm going to bring on some of our lovely partners from SmartBear. So I hope they're ready because they're coming on. Sean Butler and Matt Bonner, how are you two doing today?
Good, thanks, James. Pleasure to be on here. It's a happy Wednesday before a holiday.
Yeah, cool.
Doing great, James. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. I guess we can start with, well, you're right below me, so we'll start with Matt. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I see you're a senior marketplace solutions engineer. Anything else we should know?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm Matt. I've been working at SmartBear for about 5 years now. I focused really a lot in the cloud marketplaces. So that's specifically like the Atlassian and the AWS ecosystems. In my time at SmartBear, I've covered a number of different tool sets, whether that be on like the functional testing side of things, visual testing, performance testing, whether it spans UI or API levels. And now I've really started to focus like on those cloud marketplaces within like the API ecosystem.
Nice. Sean, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Happy
Prachi,
to.
can you take over for a second? I'm gonna.
Yeah.
This is not okay.
All right, I'm happy to introduce myself. So, hi, I'm Sean Butler. I've been with SmartBear for about 3 years here. I lead our API product management team. I've been API the entire time that I've been here. I've come from a bunch of different places, working like data privacy. I did like the MarTech space for a little while. Started my career in like human capital management at UKG. So I've been in product for most of the time, and when I'm not busy at work, I'm trying to take care of 2 psychopath Australian shepherds and a 2.5-year-old toddler. So both work and personal life keep me busy.
Nice. a lot of experience there. I think I'm probably a little inexperienced in front of you guys, but yeah, no, happy to have you guys today here. I know, Matt, you mentioned a lot about performance testing and different types of testing. I was actually a tester before I joined, automation tester before I joined AWS. So yeah, I'm super pumped to know more about what you have in store for us and how it can help on different aspects. First of all, building as well as then testing, because I used to do a lot of API testing, a lot of load testing and everything. So I just super excited to know how your products can help us do that even more efficiently. Yeah.
Awesome. We're excited to show you.
Yep. And do you guys want to start then with a quick intro on what SmartBear is, what you guys do, what are the products that you have?
Sure. So SmartBear is, I guess the best thing I put is like we're a software quality company at the end of the day. We're here to help software development teams produce high functioning, high quality applications, whether that's API or web applications or sort of anything in between. We've been focused on that mission for, I think it's like 15 years now. Is that roughly right, Matt? It's been quite a journey for SmartBear. We've grown both new products that we build out organically and through a number of acquisitions. So there's a lot of our sub brands that fall under SmartBear's overall banner that people know us by. Things like Swagger or Soap UI or the Zephyr products are typically familiar to people, and really SmartBear has pulled those up and sort of integrated those solutions together in an effort to help the modern development team drive more quality in the software that they deliver to their customers. So really, we're sort of like the company behind the curtain, so to speak, of a lot of the experiences that that you hit in the digital world today, as we help them sort of develop and then test those solutions.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah. I'm sorry about that. I missed a little bit of the spiel. I found out why I was so quiet. I kept going to Bluetooth instead of using my actual connection, which is not very helpful. But
you're back now. That's all that counts.
I'm back now. Yep. Cool. So when it comes to, I didn't want to interrupt. I was going to ask a question about what APIs are, for kind of just for anyone that doesn't know. I kind of touched on it earlier. APIs are, before I go there, was there anything that else I didn't want to interrupt that you wanted to mention real quick? No,
I was pretty much capped off there, James. So
okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that because I had to deal with my technical stuff. So for the audience out there, I'd love to hear what your definitions of APIs are, or what your understandings of them are. So to me, when I think of APIs, when I try to explain it to my grandparents or my parents, whoever who's not super technically minded, I try to think of it. I use it this way. This is my best explanation. When I sell something at a popular auction website, and I need to purchase postage to actually send that product, through the mail, like USPS or FedEx or whatever it might be, there is actually right in that popular auction website's page, you can click purchase, United States Postal Service postage right there. That's my example of it. I don't have to go to the post office's website. I don't have to go down to the post office itself. By using the auction website's web page, I can say I need a postage for XYZ from UPS or whoever, and UPS gives them this interface to say, hey, we need to purchase this. UPS, we give you this money and you give us some postage. They don't have to do anything. They just have to be able to communicate the two separate things. As long as they know what to send and everything's cool, they can send that information back and forth. So that's my super high level. It's a way for separate things to communicate and work together. Matt or Sean or Prachi, what's a better definition that I can start giving my grandparents?
I tried to stop telling my grandparents what I do. The best way I would describe it is a way two applications integrate. That's the most simple way I can put it. There's a way two applications integrate, and that's what an API is.
Yeah.
Cool. So I like the example set, James. That's the path I tend to go down of like, hey, if you you want to buy something and you have like the Visa quick checkout option. It's like, well, that's done via APIs, right? And like the way I try and think about it is, applications are becoming more and more composable, basically, where no single vendor has all the pieces that you need to get everything done in an e-com transaction or something like that. APIs make it so that I can sort of create and execute those operations all from a single interface without having to jump around to 6 different websites. So it really drives a better experience for the end consumer, being able to do everything they need to do in one place. And then the businesses behind the scenes that, all that data gets pushed to the right places. So the transaction's successful.
Yeah. That sounds good. A way to work between, I'll combine those two, a way to work between 2 separate applications and still be able to get the things to the places they are expected to be. I mean, that's kind of a way. I'm going to throw a little curveball at you. What's REST versus SOAP? Do we deal with SOAPs anymore? Not really. Hopefully not.
Not really.
No, the world will still tell you we deal with SOAP an incredible amount. So if you're building something new, you're not dealing with SOAP anymore. I don't know how many people are still generating SOAP APIs. I think it's a fairly small number at this point. But there is still a lot of SOAP that lives out there. And it is actually, I think it's still technically the second most popular API protocol behind REST. So REST dominates the market, so to speak. But as with all technology, the curve is longer than like that long tail is longer than you think it is. I still have an iPod hanging around somewhere, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, nice.
So it takes some while to get rid of things that are good.
Yeah. Like.
And I just wanted to ask, like, if you could explain very quickly how you did for API, like, can you differentiate between REST and SOAP for the audience here who might not be aware of APIs at all?
That's a good question. I would like to think about it as 2 different standards. REST services and SOAP services have 2 different standards of ways that they're created, used, manufactured. It's like comparing a boat to a car. They're different, but very similar. Like they're both vehicles. So that's kind of a way I would describe it. The REST standard has a lot more benefits, and that's why the open API space has really been developed and moved towards like a digital transformation away from SOAP, whether it's to REST, GraphQL, gRPC, whatever you're going. But I would just think about them all as different standards, and where the overall market wants to go is generally towards REST. That's what I see.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I believe that too. Like, I honestly have never had to develop anything other than a RESTful API myself, so I can't really even speak to how to use it or develop it SOAP myself. Anyway, I think that's probably enough of this kind of high level stuff. So with SmartBear, we're going to make API development and management a lot easier. Matt, do you want me to go up and pull up your screen, and then I can give the floor to you for the most part?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
All right. Yeah.
And today we're definitely going to be talking about rapid API development. So I won't really be touching on SOAP too much. So that's just a little caveat. We're going to be talking a little bit more about REST and event-driven services. Just going to start with the SwaggerHub for AWS page. So we are publicly listed on the marketplace. And if you do want to come and take a trial of anything you see today, you can do that directly on this marketplace listing page. So I do just like to point that out. There is also some other great documentation and videos and blogs in there too, but I just wanted to start there. Today, what we're really going to be focusing on is a software development lifecycle for a gaming API or application. And before I get started, I'm going to just quickly touch on kind of the differences between OpenAPI, Swagger, and SwaggerHub, which is what I'm going to show you today. So the OpenAPI spec, OAS, if familiar, used to be called Swagger, which is what was used to document RESTful APIs, which are essentially human and computable readable at the same time. Swagger is an open source project. It has 3 main components, and SmartBear supports them all: the Swagger editor, the Swagger UI, and the Swagger code gen. What I'm going to show you today is SwaggerHub, which is the professional version, which combines all of those features into a hosted application. So just a little bit of background on like Swagger, where we came from, and what SwaggerHub is now. We'll get into like the meat of the demo and like creating our gaming app now. So SwaggerHub is really a repository of all of our API documents, whether those are like documents for like reusable components like responses, requests, or actual like API documents in themselves. What we're going to do today is we're going to import an API into SwaggerHub. But API development really has two different approaches. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the code first or design first approach to API development.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'll give a quick high level overview. Code first is more of like you have your API already created, you have your application created, but now we want to get some better rules implemented on top of that. So we're going to import the API into SwaggerHub to get some of the better rules, better standards, better guidelines that are just like generally available. Design first is when we want to have our API documentation and design created before we generate the application code. This just gives us a better idea of what we think our application should do and what it should do once we're actually finished writing the code. So what's cool about this approach with the design first approach is there's generally a lot less drift in terms of what you want to create versus what you actually create. Neither are right or wrong. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question here. So you mentioned two approaches here, design first and code first. So would a SwaggerHub from SmartBear be supporting like both of those approaches?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yep. I'd say like any existing API or application, that's just like going to be default code first approach because it's already in the ecosystem. But if you want to follow more like shifting left and agile technologies, you're probably going to want to like do some design first approaches to your API just because it has added benefits to reduce that drift.
Okay, makes sense. So if you have something existing already, then you would probably go for the first one. And if you building something from the scratch or something new, then you'll probably go for the latter approach. Makes sense.
Yep, exactly.
And documentation when it comes to APIs, that's, in my experience, that's really important because, as we said, if another application needs to know how to communicate using my API, the people that are writing that application need to know what is expected, need to know what they need to send or how to call that, right? So we always like to joke that, you know, the documentation for something sucks, but when it comes to APIs, it's actually pretty crucial, right?
It determines if I use something or not, right? Like I might not use an integration if it's not easy to use. API documentation is so important.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, I'm going to continue importing my API now. We'll quickly just import an API. Like I said, if you want to create one, super easy to create one off the bat, but we'll pretend like we have like the application already created. Mine is a racing game, so we'll just import that in. We'll import it into a specific subset of projects and just like the visibility on who we want to actually have visible access to this. We'll give it the default name, Racing Game API, and a default version. And then right off the bat, we're introduced into SwaggerHub. SwaggerHub is the combination of those three tools, like I mentioned earlier, the Swagger editor, the Swagger UI, and the Swagger code gen, which will essentially like generate client side or server side code for us to automatically like give us a head start on like productizing or monetizing the application. Now, with Swagger, we also have the ability to not only use like some components, OpenAPI as a whole allows us to reuse a lot of, whether they're responses, requests, schemas at an individual level across documents. So that just really helps to save you time because then you don't have to, you know, write out a 400 level example response every time. Developers can just like quickly reference an existing document that would contain, you know, the associated files. Sorry, my monitor is blocking my other monitor. Gotta look around it. Like for example, you can see this is a component specifically because of that little puzzle piece. Here are all of the existing like examples that I could reuse across documents. This just, I enjoy this because it's super quick, reduces code clutter, and makes life not only easier for us internally, but externally, because everything works as part of like a standard.
So those, let me zoom in a little bit for myself. So all those parameters and request bodies and all that stuff on the left, was that pulled from the code itself, or did you have to write those, all that stuff on your own?
I wrote these, or I copied and pasted, if you will,
Yeah.
just to make it reusable. I started off just with the hard-coded data that's in the API, and then I'm like, all right, well, obviously some of these are usable, like some of the components of like a payment schema, for example. I'm going to reuse those across different aspects of my APIs. So I figured I'll take that and I'll put that in a document, reference it. That way, if I have to update it, update one location, not 75.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Let's keep on going and take that API. And where was it? It's probably right at the top of my screen and I missed it. Yep. All right. My favorite feature about SwaggerHub is not only do we get like the standard open API validation, you'll be able to determine like if your application, your API is out of line from making it computer or human readable. On top of that, you can programmatically enforce API rules and guidelines, which is something that I really like. So you can, start really expanding your standards and governance to the next level. So let me show you that. There's a lot of standard open API rules. Like open API has a lot of standard rules, but you can create custom rules that say, like, for example, every 200 response code must have an example reference there with example coding below, instead of just like some string array. Or every authorization every API has to be validated by an authorization. You can do all of that just like through the quick and easy UI here. And this applies across all of our APIs within scope. So this is what I really, really like. It's not just for Open API too. It goes across our event-driven services as well. So async API, but we're focusing on REST today.
Got it. And you mentioned that we can also add anything custom that we want, right? Apart from the suggested ones.
Yep, absolutely. There's custom rules. We have some recommendations. Some cool ones too that I'll show in a second are like OWASP failures. So like I'll enable these rules. We'll go back to my demo org. It's going to go through all of my APIs and start marking them as failures. I gotta go and find the document. You'll see that in a second. Like, for example, you can see a standardization error here, exactly where it failed. So what you'll be able to see here is, that's not the failure I want, an OWASP error. So it's missing response content for a 400 error. This is a commonly determined OWASP scan for our APIs. So not only can we make our APIs, more robust with standards and guidelines, you can also kind of start performing security analysis on them. So when we do perform the security testing, we're already a step ahead with those OWASP top 10 security scans. And for the group, if you're unfamiliar with OWASP, it's like the top 10 security tests to run against a like API or a service.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what I was actually going to add, that this, if we can make those custom validation rules, it's super easy when you are performing testing.
Yep, absolutely. And let's get into really our favorite part now, the testing aspect. So we can integrate with our system. Let me just change back to the racing game API, which we were using earlier. We can now integrate and start like mocking and creating a dynamic virtual service now. The API that I integrated, though, the service is actually not a real URL. It's just some arbitrarily the api.replaceme.com. So if I actually try to execute anything right now through the UI, we're going to get a 403. And that's just because my service does not exist, right? What I can do is I can actually start performing these mocks and giving my first foot in the door in terms of like an agile transformation. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an auto mock, which essentially allows us to do the most basic version of a like service virtualization.
Wow.
But the only required field for me is the name, which I just made AM. But I'm going to run this really quickly, and you'll be able to see these servers will get an additional name associated to it. And Once we get that name, that URL, that's actually a real endpoint now. So I can perform my exploratory testing, functional testing, virtualization, really make it a real service based off of this feature. Let me delete the ones that are fake, and then we'll actually execute it. Make sure everything's in line with OpenAPI. Otherwise, I'll get yelled at. As you can see, it's yelling at me.
Oh, that's nice.
And it's fine. It's yelling at me, but in different spots. But what you'll be able to see now is when I click execute, we're going to get a 200 response code. So now when we perform our get leaderboards inquiry on the race API, we'll be able to see that SmartBear won and that they got first place.
Nice.
Okay.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Just like that.
It can get more dynamic. This is the most basic version of a mock. We'll get into like, productizing and monetizing APIs too in a second.
So just quick question. If you were to create just from scratch an API here, where do you define where it's going to be hosted? Or can you sync that up with like say API gateway or something, or
exactly, you
or...
can.
Okay.
This endpoint can be anything. This could be localhost Matt 1010 or something like that, right? We just have the capability to interact with our own virtual service. But if that wanted to be an API gateway endpoint, that's hosted behind a load balancer, so you can, start routing specific requests, maybe to a live service versus a virtual service, because you're starting like this more shift left approach. That's absolutely something that we see.
Okay.
Awesome. So we can do all the management and development side here, and then use API Gateway for publishing the actual endpoints, right?
Yep, exactly. And we'll show that today. We're going to publish this spec directly to Gateway, and we'll do that in a second.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Before we do that, though, there's something that's really important that we need to do, and that's actually test and validate that this API is in production ready state, right? We have to get a little bit farther along before we can just put it on a gateway. So what we're going to talk about next is a different approach to testing than the normal end-to-end testing. What we're doing now is we're going to talk about more the shift left, extremely agile testing, which I'm going to reference as contract testing. So what contract testing allows us to do, allows us to test and detect breaking changes very, very early in our development cycle. Contract testing is done through a tool that SmartBear has called PactFlow. PactFlow is a professional tool based off of the open source tool Pact. SmartBear loves to support their open source tooling. So it just takes their contract testing to the next level with bidirectional contract testing instead of unidirectional contract testing. We're going to integrate with PactFlow right now so we can determine, is this safe to deploy to production? And we'll do that through this setup PactFlow integration. And really the only thing that I have to put in is my PactFlow base URL, which is quickly available to me, and then a reader write token, depending on what I want to do.
And I dropped the, if you want more information about PactFlow, up there on the screen, it's a little web address.
Yeah, so contract testing is a little different. It's a type of testing that focuses on verifying the interactions and agreements between components of services in an application through their API. So instead of like a much larger end-to-end test that's probably going to validate multiple components, we're validating much smaller level at unit test levels, and we're also validating like single or a few, it could be multiple components, but validating that the different parts of the system complies with predefined contracts or specs. So what I'm going to do right here is say which application that I want to reference and create my contract that would provide the agreement between. So I'm going to specifically say this SmartBear Coins Payment UI app is the one I'm going to connect to. And I'll pull up PactFlow now and we'll go through that. So PactFlow is cool because it allows us to do both provider and consumer driven contract testing. On the provider side, you can verify that the API implementation meets the contract's requirement, ensuring that if any updates to the API do not break existing functionality, And then on the consumer side, you're validating that the application correctly integrates with the API and handles the expected responses, whether those expected responses are good or bad. So it's a little bit different of an approach to testing. Very, very agile, extremely developer focused, but it allows us to work in those extremely fast-paced environments.
SmartBear coin. That sounds like a new crypto I need to invest in. Yeah.
I'll go into the contracts now. But yeah, any questions on anything I said so far?
Well, I was just going to point out this is almost identical, well, in a way, to the example I gave of a payment service. Like if you needed to make a payment, like say from anywhere, you would just kind of pull up this API, and then instead of having to actually, go into a different website or go to a different service, you could just just send what you need, and there it is.
Absolutely. We see this a lot in like the banking, financial services industry, where maybe you don't have like direct access to whether it's a component in your ecosystem or even in a partner ecosystem. Like the open banking transformation really helped drive like the microservices industry. So PactFlow is used hand in hand with those microservices industries.
Very cool.
All right, let me keep it going. Let's analyze these contracts, which ones passed, which ones failed, and get into that next. So we'll look at the passing contract first. So the contract, the provider contract, like I mentioned, is actually going to be the API. So you can see the SmartBear Coin Payee API, where it's hosted. You can even test it really quickly if you wanted to, look at some of the services. But that's the provider contract. The consumer contract is going to be a unit test that is going to determine if the provider and the consumer agree. So we can actually see the individual requests and responses from what we did and what we'd expect too. So a request to get all payees is given, server is up, is authenticated. So you can see we had a request, we got an expected response of 200. The next one is actually a false validation. So more on the authentication side, a request to get a payee with ID X is authenticated, but does not exist. So we'll send a GET request, but we get a 404 response. So that's like the bad part of the API validation. We're just expecting a 404 response. We do get a 404 response. So that is correct engagement. And then the same thing with the last one. We expect to get it, to give one, and we expect to get one. So you can see the expected request versus the expected response. Nice and easy when everything works, right? Like that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about breaking changes and detecting those breaking changes earlier in the cycle. So let me show what that looks like now with a failed contract.
Just a quick question before you go into the fail part. So in the success contracts, we saw there were like 3 that you showed. Yeah, consumer side. So is like all these tests, are they predefined, or were like does PactFlow already define these tests for you?
You have to create the test yourselves. So let me pull up like a consumer provider driven test cases. So we have our test cases. They could be validating individual nodes. They could be validating multiple nodes, headers, requests, bodies, whatever it is, right? So we're validating in this use case. This is the consumer test that we're going to expect certain values from that provider when we send a request to it. So when you publish that code, you're going to send a request to PactFlow, and it would essentially determine, is this expected result in the API? If so, then we can publish our code. If not, it's not safe to deploy that code.
Perfect. Okay. So you can define your test cases in the code itself, and then it picks up that test cases to create those scenarios there.
Exactly.
Okay. Makes sense. That's actually really cool. That you don't have to manually define those things.
Yeah, you send a request to PactFlow, and the Pact CLI will essentially do that for you, and it will generate the contract, and then your unit tests are essentially just validating that your contract is as expected.
Yeah.
And this use case, we'll see a contract was not expected. So we sent a request, but the contract actually says we can't have more than 3 characters. So we can see we sent a request, and in the request body, or rather the response body, there was a euros name when it actually shouldn't be the name of the currency. It should be the whatever the 3 letters term is called. I can't think of that off the top of my head. It should be like USD, for example.
Oh, yeah.
EUR.
So
Yeah.
exactly. That's why it's failing in this use case, is because there's a mismatch. It should be, this is what this file matches, 3 characters that are all uppercase. So you'll be able to determine, where that mismatch was and actually get confidence to deploy your code. Because if I try to deploy my code with this, you'd be able to see that it's going to say, no, you aren't allowed to deploy your code with that change to the API spec. Compared to, can I deploy now because we've modified that code, or the API, one side we have to modify, right? So can I deploy the code? I'm just going to deploy it to prod. It's going to say yes or no. And in this use case, it says yes.
Yeah.
Deploying directly to prod. I love it.
Hey, we're talking about agile testing, and
Yeah.
even beyond agile testing, right, is that shift right testing, testing in production. But you have to have the fastest feedback loops, right, to be able to actually do that. So PactFlow would be part of something that you would need probably to alert you to determine before you push code, can you actually deploy it?
That makes sense. Excuse me.
Our API is good to go now. It's deployed. SwaggerHub says it's compatible. So let's deploy our code. We'll do that to Amazon API Gateway now. Amazon API Gateway and SwaggerHub has 2 integrations. There is the one with a, it's essentially a mock service backend. It's that HTTP integration backend. So we'll just act as a mock service. There's another one which will become a Lambda function as your backend. So for each resource, it will actually generate a Lambda function. I prefer the Lambda sync because it's much cooler in my opinion, so we're going to go with that. So we'll just call this gateway, and then we have a couple of fields to fill out, an access key, a secret key.
Okay.
And
Yeah, that answered my question. I was going to say, is there a way for it to communicate directly with your account and stuff? And it looks like, yeah.
Yep, exactly. And the cool thing is, once we do eventually publish it and push it, there's inherently going to be some changes to our API. We need to make sure that it functions in the future. Maybe there's bugs, whatever it is. Any changes I make in SwaggerHub, once I click save, will automatically get deployed to Amazon API Gateway.
Very nice.
I'm going to, again, just click create, and then I'll click play just because I like how fast this works. But Prachi, did you have a question? Sorry.
No, I just said that's very cool. So any changes essentially, if any developers or any front-end developers would make here, then you can directly sync it to your API gateway as well, right? The corral API.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And we'll do that right now. So I'll execute this integration. It'll say, woohoo, you executed your integration if I entered everything correctly. And we'll be able to see that on the access portal. So let me jump into Gateway. We'll start at Gateway, and then I'll jump to Lambda. And you can see the racing app. Oh, I clicked submit twice earlier today as well. Forgot to delete that one. Oops, it's fine. So what you can see here is the deployed API is already deployed to Amazon API Gateway. It's not deployed into a stage yet. We're still in our pre-production environment. But what happens now is I can immediately go and test this endpoint. We'll just enter in some query string that's default, and you'll notice we get the request, we get a response, the status code associated to it. But this is at the most basic level, right? This is still a mock, in my opinion. It's not a virtual service. It's not almost replicating an application. That's what the advantage of Lambda has on here. So for each and every resource, there will be a Lambda function that gets generated. And I like this because now here's where we start productizing and monetizing our API. It becomes a real virtual service, a real application, because we can add in, whether it's different AWS service access, RDS, S3, anything like that, or maybe application logic. request or response pairing, like you get a certain request, you want to output a certain response based off of an input parameter. Here's where we can really take it to the next level and make this an application.
Got it. So just a quick question there. If from the SwaggerHub or from PactFlow, if I just use the AWS API gateway integration and not the Lambda one, can I still later on make it a Lambda integration? Is that
Yep,
possible?
absolutely. So essentially the difference would be we would not have a Lambda function. It would be a HTTP request or a mock request. So just like I'm changing this now on an individual level, you could do that or do it in bulk. And that's essentially how it would work. Very similar to the like URL with vert server that I entered earlier. It will just act as like a pretty static mock.
Got it. Makes sense.
Here are all the Lambda functions that were generated. I do just like to highlight these because this is really cool that it generates every single function for each resource. So there's no limitation here on like, we only got one function going, right? We can get very dynamic here based off of that API. All right. The next thing with API's lifecycle is really taking this function, application, or API and adopting it. Adopting is so important to actually productize and monetize the API, because if it's not easy to use, nobody's going to use it. Let's go and talk about like actually like a portal, a documentation portal, a developer portal utilizing this. So we'll jump back to SwaggerHub. SwaggerHub has a portal feature, which I enjoy, and we'll jump directly to it. This portal feature has internal views, I'll call it, and external views. So for example, if you wanted like external clients or external partners to have access to this, they would just simply see the external view or like a consumer view compared to a provider view editing it. So this is the consumer view. As you can see, it's very gaming focused. So we have a lot on analytics and telemetry, coin payments, fundamental and racing, in-game marketplaces, and more. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and start actually creating documentation for this. So we had the fundamental racing API is what we focused on today. What we're going to do here is we're going to quickly go and add that API to our documentation. So we'll link that API. You can link multiple APIs too. There's no limits on this. It's in the gaming app project, just makes it easier to filter. And we'll quickly go and link this API. Like I said, I'm a test and production man, so we're not going to do the preview.
So with this,
go ahead.
With this, I was going to say with this documentation, like, so if I'm using SubscriberHub or SubscriberHub, if I'm subscribing and using SwaggerHub, will this documentation like be included as part of like, how do I say it? Will it be hosted as part of my, subscription or contract with using SwaggerHub? Or do I have to publish this documentation to my own, web page, my own server or something?
No, this is included with SwaggerHub. This is like our SwaggerHub documentation portal. Nothing is hosted internally unless you wanted, like everything we're talking about today is SaaS. So all of the applications that I showed are all SaaS hosted by SmartBear.
Cool. All right.
And just a follow-up question on that, Matt. Say, for example, as James mentioned, that this will be hosted in SwaggerHub, right? The whole documentation. So anyone and everyone on the team can then refer to this documentation. Is that correct? Like, how does that work? Is it very similar to GitHub where everything is centralized if there are multiple people working on it on different portfolios?
Exactly.
Is that possible?
Exactly. You can do that. You can have multiple users. You could have multiple versions. You could have user-based version, team-based version, feature-based versions of whether they're APIs, applications, and then hosting them in a centralized documentation location. So that way they get adopted on top of their use, just like in terms of development. But yes, absolutely, that is a capability.
Perfect. So I'm assuming everything would be then real-time and dynamic, right? If one person makes changes, it would be reflecting to the other person as well at the same time.
Exactly. As long as they save the document, there'll be no problem.
Awesome.
Cool. Okay. Well, this sounds like a good spot to jump in. If you're just tuning in now, why haven't you tuned in an hour ago? This is Howdy Partner. Welcome to the show. This is our weekly Twitch show that we at AWS do, where we bring vetted partners and their solutions onto the show them what makes them awesome. I'm James Spencer. I'm a partner solutions architect at AWS. I'm with my co-host Prachi and some of our partners from SmartBear, and we're talking SmartBear SwaggerHub and PactFlow, specifically about how they help us with API development, management, documentation, testing, everything you can think of that you would need to do with APIs. Check them out. They're super cool. I'm dropping links in chat as we go. And if you get a chance, I pinned a comment to the top of the chat. It wouldn't be an AWS stream without survey. Survey's only like 5 questions, pretty much yes or no. Please check it out. Drop us a line. Tell us what you think. And I will turn it back over to SmartBear. And thank you all for tuning in.
Awesome. Let's keep it going. So on the documentation side of the API, you have the ability to test it too. So there's great testing in terms of like an API developer designing an API. I need to test it to make sure it works as expected, right? This testing now is more in terms of the sign of exploratory testing. I want to make sure that this API is going to follow the need that I have when I start building out integrations or something like that. Now we can test in the UI, nice and easy. Like for example, we'll just send the API request and you'll be able to see we got a 200 response. I didn't modify any of the data though. For example, if we want to modify some more data, we have exploratory testing tools baked into SwaggerHub too. So I can quickly go search for the get leaderboard command. And maybe I do want to, actually start modifying my request body and start planning a little bit more into, what goes on into my service. So let me go back here. Doesn't want to work, but that's all right. We'll just send in the request manually via this copy paste, which is also one of the nice features of Explorer is it doesn't have to, if I could copy and paste. There we go. You can just paste it in nice and easy. So maybe I want to modify my request body. Instead of using SmartBear for the leaderboard, I'm going to put my username, which I think is just Matt. Seems good to me. When I send this request, you can see either if it gets a valid response or an invalid response based off of that service. I actually don't know what the input values are supposed to be for my service. That's probably what the documentation would have been great for. It looks like there was another, it was expecting an array, which is why it failed. So great reason as to why you need to test it to make sure it's going to work in your use case when it comes to building out these integrations. Just from me building it quickly, I tried an individual unit, an individual script compared to it should have been an array of JSON values instead. One other thing I love about Portal is it's not just individual products. It's not just one page. You can jump between different products. These products can contain multiple APIs, and you can essentially build out your own academies, your own FAQs, your own links to videos, anything like that. Now, in the gaming space specifically, there's a very, very big input on telemetry and analytics. So if you're unfamiliar, telemetry in gaming is the automation collection of data about like player game performance and like other system operations in real time. So this data encompasses a wide range of metrics of such as like in-game actions, session durations, network latency, to name another one. So by understanding this data, like game developers can get a lot more insights on how their players are interacting with games. It's one of those situations of the more data, the better we get, and production data is the best data. Nobody wants test data. So telemetry is extremely important in the gaming world. And one thing I do like to highlight about the SmartBear ecosystem, and this isn't API specific, this is just my use case specific, is Bugsnag. Bugsnag is SmartBear's post-deployment monitoring tool. So say we were able to take an API through the whole development stage, and now it is produced in an application, sitting somewhere, and real users are using it. We need to monitor that application to understand how real users are going to interact with it, how they're using it, get error feedback, event feedback, anything like that. Bugsnag is essentially like instantiated inside of your SDK or your application. You install an SDK and then you instantiate it, like, for example, when there's an error, send a request to Bugsnag or something like that. And it allows you to get like breadcrumbs, stack traces, telemetry specific data that'll lead you all the way down into like the reason for failure in the code, which I think is really cool. And I'll show that in a second.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like debugging can be either the easiest thing or the hardest thing. I mean, if you don't,
Yeah, exactly.
if you don't even know where to look, like that can be 99% of the problem. Is just finding.
And what is the problem, right? Like it could just be like you have cached stuff in your browser. Like the other day, something login form wasn't working. It was just because I had cached stuff, clear browsing history, and I was off to go. It was great. It was that easy. But like understanding based off of environments, understanding based off of, you know, the specific error or when it occurred is really important.
Yeah.
So now with the, go ahead.
I was just going to mention my own comment about the telemetry piece. Whenever I think of telemetry and gaming, I think of all the numbers I turn on at the top of my
exactly.
My
That's what it is too.
Packet losses, ping, you know, FP, like all that kind of good stuff. That's what I usually think of.
Like the UUID too of the session that you're in or something like that. It's some random integer. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And just taking that information from each event that happens in a game. So imagine a jump, imagine a stick movement, anything like that. Each and every event will have some telemetry associated with it.
Yeah. And I also saw on the previous page, it mentioned some of the languages and you could use, and I mentioned Unity was like one of the engines, it looked like. So I thought that for $1, yeah, right there. I was like, oh, cool. Like Unity, you can, that's one of the engines I used back when I did game dev. So that's cool.
Yeah, Bugsnag's a really cool application. It does real user event monitoring, which I find as like one of those fascinating things. And it's important when we are doing post-deployment monitoring and doing that, like, I'll call it shift right and like, you know, really high level testing. But this is production level testing is what it is.
The players are the testers.
Exactly. So then we can like look at individual failures too. Like for example, the failures today on the reasons for failures. You can get the specific event, you can get the stack trace, the breadcrumbs associated to it, and get really, really deep into individual failures. This example didn't have a trace all the way to the code snippet. Let me look for one that goes down to a code function exactly. So here we have the stack trace that will go all the way down to determine that, oh, there's something that's being called on that's not a function. So it makes it really easy to debug in those high pace environments too, because you know what to debug all the way down to the line of code. And that's the best thing about telemetry, is it gives us those insights. Bugsnag also is probably SmartBear's name. That's my favorite, personal level, but we got some cool names here.
And does that come with the SwaggerHub itself if I subscribe to SwaggerHub?
No, this is an entirely different product on the post-deployment realm. I thought it tied well to the gaming discussion we were having with that example, so I couldn't leave it out. Everybody loves data too, right?
Yeah.
Data is the new oil. That's what one of my colleagues said that I always quote her.
That's a good quote. And it's true too, especially good like real data from like production environments, like I mentioned earlier. Like quality data is hard to come by.
Which leads to my next quote. It's more common: garbage in, garbage out. So yeah, good data is, maybe I should change it. Good data is the new oil.
Yes.
So that really covers the software development lifecycle of the racing app or API that I created. We started with designing the API, made sure it was safe to deploy, then deployed it to that gateway with the Lambda backends to try and like monetize and productize that API and with whatever other AWS resources we were using. tried our best to adopt the API and app. And then once we actually did get it into production, we are monitoring the real user experience too. So it's that full end-to-end life cycle that SmartBear can help provide. These are only a handful of our tools. We have 25 different tools that span the software development life cycle. Some of our flagship ones are like the ones that I talked about today, though, especially in the API space, we talked about most of the flagship ones.
Yeah. So I'm going to poke around up on the UI. What is the performance tab? What is that?
I knew somebody was going to ask me that. And when we click over here, we're going to see, I didn't set it up yet.
Oh.
So that is, you can monitor real user performance testing too with real user monitoring to get the like session tracking information on on the performance of a user traveling through an application beyond just like what I showed you was a functional error, right? That was a functional error. Now it goes that step farther onto performance on that error as well.
Okay. That's cool.
But yes, I do not have it set up. I knew that was going to get asked.
No, that's yeah, because it's always kind of cool. Like, like you said, data. Like you can just see how long you're invocating for, and how much things like that. How many calls are being made? Is that kind of what that is, or am I thinking
exactly what services are being tested? For example, if it touches 7 different like services or has 10 different events that trigger those services, those data are available. So it kind of ties back to that microservice architecture too, which is absolutely what you see in like a high-paced gaming app.
Oh yeah, you have to. I mean, you can't, especially online games now. Every game pretty much nowadays has an online component, and yeah, you can't. I mean, monoliths in modern online games are almost impossible. Like everything has to be decoupled.
And that's why we probably see a lot less SOAP as well. We've kind of come full circle with the SOAP to REST. SOAP is a very heavy, like a heavy standard, right? Compared to REST, it's that lightweight one. We're good to go. It's designed for real applications. That was funny. I wasn't expecting that to come full circle.
So I had a question on, say, you mentioned how we can use all these products along with the API gateway on AWS. Like, how else would, say, a customer be doing it right now if not, say, using SwaggerHub or PactFlow? And why should they go for, like, if you want to sum it up to like 5 differentiation points or 5 benefits of using this, what would you say? Yeah.
Good question. I would say number one, coming from a previous tester myself, is maintenance. Maintenance and dealing with like whether it's like they kind of all blend together. Maintenance and collaboration are going to be like my top 2. Maintenance, having to just have something in a centralized location and just everybody works on something collaboratively is something that's really, really important. And when you start scaling and if you have 2 users building an API, it's fine. Like nobody's going to overwrite too much. I'm working on X, you're working on Y. But when you start scaling, building out multiple APIs a day, start building and believing in this microservice architecture, it gets very complicated. Things get lost. You'll lose other capabilities as well, like the domains capability or like the SwaggerHub standards and governance extra capability that you have. There's definitely features that can help accelerate your software development lifecycle. So those I think are very, very important. If you were not using SwaggerHub, you'd probably be using some open source tooling, holding everything internally, some homegrown solution. There's a couple other competitors out there that do similar aspects, but I think SwaggerHub does great at like a API design and documentation. That's where they are the most feature rich, I would say. PactFlow, it's generally like coming into more of that agile methodology. Everybody loves to write end-to-end tests because they test everything. Contract testing can test everything, and you can test it a lot faster and a lot more, but it's just sooner in the process. So like as I first saw when I came from the UI side, and it was like waterfall testing, manual testers. I went to the API side and it was like, everyone's becoming agile testing. Let's get automation. Let's build everything in Docker images. Let's like try and make everything as automated as possible. And then now it's like, okay, let's do this extreme agile shift left, shift right test in production with PactFlow, so we can actually get that high quality software at that extreme velocity.
Yeah, makes sense.
I was gonna say I'm gonna quote you right here. Everyone loves writing tests and then testing. I don't know how that's a controversial statement. I think we all know testing has to be done, but I don't know how many people actually enjoy it.
Yeah, well, and if I could just add to, it's part of like the thing I think that works well with PactFlow. Like, yeah, you have to write tests, and unit test coverage has become like sort of a universally important, and tracked figure across development teams today. So by being able to tie into those, PactFlow really helps you leverage the work that you've already done. And I'll say too, like, using services like AWS, like, you can do things quite quickly, and you can spin up a lot of microservices, and that increases your complexity pretty quickly. And by taking tools like PactFlow and SwaggerHub along the way, you can leverage PactFlow to like manage the complexity of those tests and those microservice environments effectively as you scale up, and sort of keeping those contracts in place. And then you can use SwaggerHub as sort of your central repository to keep all that information together and cataloged across AWS and any other gateway partners that you might have.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would second that, because if nowadays people are moving towards and have already pretty much moved towards building the CI/CD pipelines with multiple portfolios and people, so having this integration from PactFlow for API testing, I think that's really cool to have. That makes a lot of stuff easier on the testing side.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And then ideally, you don't have to write as many tests, right? Because if you change something, just reuse all your tests, the components don't change. PactFlow will tell you if they did. That's the nice part.
Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I didn't think of that. That's cool. So we have the SwaggerHub marketplace listing here. Are other marketplace listings coming soon? I see a free trial too. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, how people can get started. I've been dropping links, like I said, but maybe one of you guys can come from one of your mouths, since you know more than I do.
So coming from the marketplace background, we definitely have a focus on getting more of our tools listed in the AWS marketplace. So you'll be able to see that definitely this year you'll see a couple additional tools get sent there, with more coming after that as well. All of our SmartBear tools, whether it's SwaggerHub, PactFlow, Bugsnag, will have a free trial associated to it. So I always recommend come and test that trial, test our applications in your environment, get the look and feel, see how they're easy to use. All the SmartBear tools are generally designed to be super easy to use. We have amazing documentation for all of our products. So that's something that I really love too. If you want to come and check out some of our other tooling that SmartBear has, we're simply just at smartbear.com. And you can go through a lot of our different products that we have too. Today we focus a lot on the API world, but we have testing products. We have post-deployment monitoring products too.
Nice.
And these aren't all of them. These are some of like the more flagship products.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a lot. That's cool. I like the names too. Load Ninja, Bugsnag. Yeah. Zephyr. I like that one. Cool. So yeah, I guess we're getting close to the end here. Is there anything else that you'd like to? Stage is kind of yours. Anything else you'd like to plug? I heard that you're going to be at the New York Summit coming up next week. Are any of you two personally going to be there?
I will be there, and I'll be walking around the New York Summit all day on Wednesday. So look for me. I'd be happy to chat.
Yeah, and we do have actually my boss, our chief product officer, Dan Faulkner, will be down there as well and around. And I believe, Matt, are we hosting something after the show?
Yes. So we have a happy hour event. It is the night before the show. So that's Tuesday. I believe that's the 9th. So yep, reach out to me if you would like to attend. We'd love to have attendees. We're going to have our CPO, Dan, give an insight on AI injection, as well on like the UI
cool.
side, as well as the API side. We have some great AI tools at SmartBear too. So that's just some of the cool stuff you can find out in New York.
Nice. So you're going to be doing like not just like they're representing SmartBear, but you're going to have like sessions as well. It sounds like.
Yep. So we're going to have the AI session will be with Dan, which will be before, but I'll be available for sessions throughout the entire day on Wednesday.
That's cool. Oh, yeah, I wish I could be there. I love conference and summit parties. Like there's like websites you can go to that list them all and stuff. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, if you're anyone is out there is going to be in the area, definitely come check them out. Come hang out and have a happy hour. That sounds cool. I wish I could be there, but alas.
I'm going to be there, so I'll definitely stop by.
Oh, sweet.
Awesome.
Nice. Cool. Again, please check out the I dropped it in the chat. Please give us a couple responses on our survey if you have a second. I guess that almost wraps it up. I guess one last chance. Our Matt or Sean, are any of you famous for anything else? Do you have a cat Instagram? Do you have 1 million TikTok dance followers? Anything like that?
Maybe just LinkedIn as well.
Just LinkedIn?
Yeah, no. Other than I've appeared on a number of like SaaS/corporate webinars. But no, not famous for anything in particular. Although working on my golf game quickly, to try to get there someday.
Cool. I mean, golf game is always a work in progress, so sounds good to me. Well, great. I guess we can sign off. Thank you all for joining us here with SmartBear, and thank you, Matt and Sean, for showing up. We'd love to have you back sometime. Maybe talk about some of the, like you said, there was like 20 products there. We can talk about something
AI
else.
development as well.
Yeah. We can talk about one of those, show those off, or just anything else. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely. Thanks, James.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. And again, thank you all for viewers for joining us. And please check out our survey. Check out SmartBear, and we will see you next time. Appreciate it. Have a good day, everybody.